Today we are going to do a special video episode of our Indiana Jones Guns episode of Gordon's Gun Closet. And with me today is my very good friend Steve Pelican.
Hello.
Who is a aficionado of Indiana Jones. All things Indiana Jones.
Hats and jackets and everything else.
And guns.
And guns.
And so we're going to talk guns because, well, we have the hats and jackets, so we have to talk about the guns because they're, well, it's Gordon's Gun Closet. Anyway, so, Steve, what's the first gun you see in the Indiana Jones series?
The first one you see is the Remington there, since you're a little closer. And this is the pistol you see the bearer decide to pull on Indiana Jones to kill him and get the map. It is one of your classic cowboy guns. It's a 45 caliber, single action. You pull the hammer in order you want to fire it, which is what happens when he first pulls the pistol on Indy. He cocks it. It's very ominous and movie sounding. Indy cocks his head, turns around, pulls the whip, pulls back the whip, and whips it out of his hand. Why he doesn't just shoot Indy? Well, it would end the movie really quick.
It's a very heavy trigger pull.
It's a very heavy trigger pull. It's a good, solid cowboy action shooter gun also.
And let me show you what single action means.
Okay.
Is that when you have to cock it for each shot, and then there's that real heavy trigger pull, and takes the hammer a long time for it to go down, although I think it lands like on half cock when it's in the water, sort of on the rocks, and getting all scarred up is a very horrible thing to do.
And it goes off with it at half cock, I believe.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. So what's the next thing?
The next thing we see him use is a Smith & Wesson 1917.
Which we don't have.
You'll be hearing that a lot.
The next best thing, though, is the Colt 1917, which was the competitor to Smith & Wesson, and the United States Army adopted this at the same time, obviously. 1917. Takes 45 automatic pistol cartridges. So, talk.
As you said, it's a 45 caliber, in this case, Colt revolver. What they did with the 1917 for Raiders of the Lost Ark was they cut 1.5 inches off the barrel, soldered on another ring to hold the front sight. Why they did this, we're not entirely sure. One of the theories was they had a holster that was too small for the full barrel length, so they cut down the barrel. Other people say, well, it looked like that when they got it. It just looked more menacing. It looked better on film. But yeah, this is the 5-inch or 6-inch.
5.5 on this one.
And they cut it down to 4 inches with 1.5 inches off. After this one gets taken away by Belloc in the jungle, he ends up with another Smith & Wesson, in this case a hand ejector, which they also cut 1.5 inches off the front of the barrel on a nice collector's piece, and then resoldered on a new front sight.
Now, I don't have a Smith & Wesson hand ejector either, but again, I've got the Colt version thereof. The hand ejector and this Colt News Service were both British contract for World War I, and this one is in .455, just like that hand ejector. Now, what was the reason they used that different pistol?
For one thing, the first pistol came from an armorer called Stembridge, and it was an American firearm provider for the Hollywood for the Hollywood firearms, and they filmed the beginning of the movie in Hawaii, so they were able to use a U.S. provider. When they filmed most of the rest of the movie, it was in the London studios, it was in Tunisia, it was in Egypt, they were all over the place, and bringing U.S. firearms through customs was going to be a pain. So they went with a company called Bapti. And they did the conversion, as far as we can tell, for the .455 caliber revolver. There was also some issues with perhaps getting enough 45 caliber blanks, so they were able to get .455 coming from a British supplier.
Okay. So after Indy, actually, even in fairly early, no, wrong film. After Indiana Jones gets on the ship, we see him with an automatic.
He ends up with a 9mm in Nepal, first off.
Oh, okay. That's right.
During the gun battle in the bar, he's firing several rounds at the Nazi goons from his revolver. And then in another cut, suddenly he's got a automatic pistol he fires several rounds from with no real idea where he pulled this pistol out of.
It shows up.
It shows up. To many fans, it looked like, oh, he has a .45. He's an American with a Colt 1911, or this pistol here.
Ta-da.
But,
which is what I thought he had.
But what he actually has is a Browning high-power 9mm. There's a couple reasons for that. 9mm blanks are far easier to get than .45 ACP, which is what the 1911 uses. Also, the 1911 is horribly difficult to blank adapt, meaning when you pull the trigger on an automatic, it needs to have some sort of pressure buildup to rack the slide. To do that on a 1911, you need to
grind a lot of this little ejector port off.
Yeah, you need to make this much wider so the blanks can actually eject without jamming it. You need to grind all the locking lugs, which make the pistol safe to fire inside of the barrel. Effectively plug most of the barrel and take away a bunch of its safety features in order to actually make it function on stage. So they decided to go with a 9mm, partially because they didn't think anyone would really notice, except for people like me who and Gordon and probably the rest of you who would notice the difference. The 9mm disappears for most of the rest of the movie until he's back on the ship before the submarine scene, which has its own issues. The engines stop on the ship. He pulls out the 9mm and says, I'm going to go check it out. Again, we don't know where the 9mm went to, where it came from, or anything about it, because then it disappears once again for the rest of the movie.
But at least it came out in 1935, which makes it possible for him to have.
Yes, unlike all the German guns that came out after the movie takes place.
Yes. Oh, well. Back to the shootout in the bar in Tibet.
In Tibet.
Right. We see the ubiquitous Mauser broom handle with a shoulder stock, I believe. Or is it?
I don't remember. I feel bad now.
They're all over the place. The Mauser broom handle, which Harrison Ford should be sort of used to these.
Yeah, they used a cut-down barrel and heavily modified Mauser broom handle for Han Solo's pistol in Star Wars.
Yes, it's a awkward gun. Handles well, but sort of ubiquitous in the Far East during the 1930s. So actually perfect for some of the thugs, although the real thugs were in the next movie.
That was in the next movie.
The thuggies. Speaking of next movies, we also find a few of these floating around in Temple of Doom. Or not in the Temple of Doom, but at least in
Club Obi-Wan.
Club Obi-Wan.
It's the name of the bar at the beginning of Temple of Doom.
Aha. A 38 Special Smith & Wesson, which seemed to be all over the place in that bar fight.
Basically every revolver that they could grab, I think they had the gangsters carrying.
Yes, they had Smith & Wessons, they had Colts, they had Webley at least, and of course the Thompson submachine gun, because you cannot have
Can't have gangsters without the Tommy.
Guns. Exactly. So I think we've run out of guns.
Well, we got one more.
We do? Oh, we do.
Now, those of you with the closer attention to Webley's will know that this is the wrong pistol, but it's as close as I can get when I do my costuming. In The Last Crusade, Indy carries a Webley Green, or WG, revolver in .455. Nice, big, heavy-duty Webley revolver, first used around World War I, but then had a good reputation. The WG, however, has a rounded buttstock here, or hand grip. They call it a bird's head grip. The WG also had a different rear sight that was more adjustable, and a different front sight. The WG, however, is several $1,000s as opposed to several $100s, which made this a better choice for me to use. It's also a fun little shooter.
Now, doesn't he also use this, though, in the scene with the swordsman? Doesn't he have a Webley?
In the scene with the swordsman, there's two different scenes. In Raiders of the Lost Ark, he's faced by a swordsman with a big scimitar, and he swings it around. And there was supposed to be a very long fight scene between the stunt coordinator, who was dressed as a swordsman, versus Indy with the whip. I've got a whip back here on my costume jacket. And it was all choreographed out. They'd spent a lot of time training it. However, Harrison Ford and most of the rest of the cast had dysentery at the time of the shooting. He was heavily dehydrated and had other symptoms and asked, "Can I just shoot him?" And Spielberg said, "Let's give it a try." They didn't really tell the swordsman that this was going to happen. So the crowd parts. He brandishes the sword and he expects Harrison Ford to whip out the whip, and instead opens the holster, shoots him, and then turns and walks off. The stunt coordinator plays it perfectly, and out of surprise, falls dead. Crowd goes nuts. One of the best scenes in the movie.
Gordon, you've worked with that stunt coordinator.
Oh, is that Terry Leonard?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Oh, yes. I worked with Terry Leonard on Rough Riders.
Yeah. And
he was a second unit director on Rough Riders.
Yes.
And Terry also played the mechanic in the fight scene with the flying wing that he meets an untoward end with a propeller. There's another scene with a swordsman, and it harkens back to that first scene that we mentioned in Raiders of the Lost Ark, is in Temple of Doom. Mm-hmm. He's escaped from the Temple of Doom, and he's running away, and he's faced by two swordsmen. They brandish their swords like in the first movie. We all recognize this. He reaches into his holster, which is empty. And instead of drawing his whip and fighting, he does the smart thing and turns around and runs. Because
that's what you do.
Indy is one of the smarter superheroes out there.
Yes. He who fights and runs away lives to fight another day.
Exactly.
Very good. And there it is. So if you'd like to hear us pontificate in greater depth, we have a podcast, Gordon's Gun Closet. This would be number 18. And give it a listen, because we actually go into probably way too much detail.
A lot more detail.
On these same guns and various others. Listen to it. And again, I want to thank Steve for showing up.
Happy to do so.
And taking part in this silly exercise. Thank you, Steve.
You're welcome.
So, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Bad cat.
Meow.